Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Sports Hop, a show that looks at two independent entities in music and sports and explores how they've influenced each other over the years in so many different ways and a number of different times in life. I am your host, William McLaughlin, aka The Kid, and as always, let's get this bad boy rolling.
Shut up and sit down.
So if you've listened to the first two episodes, you get an idea of what this show is about and how it looks at the way music and sports, although two completely different entities, has a great way of influencing each other and how they've been able to do it over the year. In my first episode, I looked at hoops and hip-hop and examined how those two, although two very independent things all alone, are very much the same and almost the exact same thing when it comes to the flow, the rhythm, the poetry, and just how the smoothness of it all works when practiced over time and constantly repeated until you have a great work of art in front of you in hoops and hip-hop. My second episode, I took a different path and looked at the unlikely birth of stadium rock and how these different songs from these hair metal bands and really live rock bands and all these stadium anthems really took over and became a mainstay and a steady treyarch in the setup of live sporting events that you still hear to this day, and also in pop culture, in television and movies, and anywhere on the radio or just anything you find in social media. Now, this week's episode is going to focus on something that is very popular around the world. To a lot of people, it is considered the music event of the year, and that's up for debate by a lot of other people as well that are big music fans or music critics themselves. But what I'm going to be talking about is the rise in popularity of the Super Bowl halftime show, how it ultimately came to be and was ultimately saved by a man named Michael Jackson. And I'm also going to look at my favorite top 5 Super Bowl halftime performances of all time, while at the same time looking back at the Super Bowl halftime itself before Michael Jackson started performing and what it was like in the early days of the early Super Bowls. But so far, that's what it is. Let's get right into it. Now, when you look at the Super Bowl halftime show, that's almost a national concert itself. A lot of people make jokes to this very day that aren't sports fans whenever they see an artist they may like or really want to listen to perform. That running joke a lot of you have probably constantly heard about, like, oh, why is there a football game being played right in the middle of like a Justin Timberlake concert, for example, for this year's Super Bowl halftime show. But what's really cool about it is that this event itself has taken on a whole life of its own. Prior to Michael Jackson performing in the Super Bowl, there wasn't a whole lot about the Super Bowl that really stuck out. And the NFL, they found something that truly ultimately helps sell the event outside of sports, because there are some people who go to these Super Bowl events and only come for the halftime show because it may be of the artist that is playing and that they really want to listen to live or see live, and this is going to be their one chance to do it. Again, they may have no interest in the Super Bowl and who's playing. I guarantee you there were probably about half the people that were at Justin Timberlake's concert during the Super Bowl at the halftime performance that could have cared less that the Eagles beat the Patriots. They were only there simply because of the music, and it was, to them, a chance to see their favorite artist live. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this one up right away is because the Super Bowl itself it's almost a national holiday for a lot of people. For sports fans, they always complain about that Monday after Super Bowl Sunday, how they wish it was a day off that they could have. I mean, and some people probably are a little too hungover or too tired or just too full and hate themselves for eating so much that they probably don't even go to work in that day. They call in, they take their paid time off, and some of them, who knows, maybe even get fired. But that's neither here nor there. But that just lets you know exactly how big the Super Bowl is for a lot of fans. It's practically a national holiday. The nice thing was I was able to stay or watch the Super Bowl at a friend's place, and the spread they had for this, you would have think we were having like a holiday celebration party, but nope, there was only, I want to say, about a handful of us, 5 or 6 altogether, that came over to watch the Super Bowl, all good friends that personally knew each other. But the spread, it probably could have fed maybe 30 people, no questions asked. And all this was for a football game. Now, granted, it is the football game at the professional level, and from someone who is an avid football fan and has seen his New York Giants win 2 Super Bowls over the Patriots, it's great. it's one of the best events of the year, and there's a lot of other things that go into the Super Bowl that also make it great, and one of those is the halftime performance. Now, you can't discredit what else also plays along to making the Super Bowl such a big entity is the commercials. The commercials are great. That is something that you could discuss in a whole nother segment all its own, but that's not what the focus of this episode is. The focus of this episode is on the halftime performance and how, if those of you that have watched it over the years or even just this past year, they even said, the announcers and the voiceover for the Super Bowl said, like, this is the music event of the year. Now, that's debatable because there are a lot of great concerts that happen throughout the year. There are a lot of awesome festivals that people have gone to or that happen around the world on a yearly basis. I mean, the Grammys themselves stick out as, in my opinion, the biggest music event of the year because you're able to honor the best of the business in a number of different genres. Do they always get it right? No. But it's a big statement when you're coming out saying that a concert that is maybe 30 minutes long, if that, is the biggest music event of the year. Now, the reason they can say it's one of the biggest events of the year is because they draw such big names for it. Now, there have been times in years past where the performers have been a little shaky or a little too old, and there have also been moments where people catch things that are now iconic. You know, the Left Shark from Katy Perry's performance, Red Hot Chili Peppers when they performed and how their guitars weren't even plugged in. U2 when they performed and how just nobody liked them, and somehow iPhone managed to put an entire album on people's phones when they came out, which was just weird, and again, a whole nother segment. But that's the idea of what the Super Bowl halftime performance is. It's the name is what garners the attention, and when you're able to put it with such a big event in the Super Bowl, like that is the mecca of football outside of the national championship for college football. And it's really hard to rival it. You can't put up anything against it. Like the NBA Finals is a great setup. As an NBA fan, I think the NBA Finals are awesome. The World Series, the College World Series, all of those big-time games in each sport all have their own greatness to them, but that's what makes the Super Bowl kind of up there above everything else is because they have that halftime performance. And the commercials also do help, not taking away anything from that. But when you look at the halftime show itself, it can garner so much attention from fans not even related or even giving a damn about sports that they will watch the Super Bowl simply because of what's happening at halftime. So now that you've got the idea of that and why I'm talking about this, we're going to go back and look, and I'm going to discuss the history of the Super Bowl halftime and how a guy in the name of Michael Jackson, the king of pop, was able to save it. The Super Bowl halftime show never really had anything that was hip. Forbes.com did an article back in 2013 that kind of talks about it. They give a quick little setup about it. If you look at NFL.com, they've even discussed about how Michael Jackson's former manager brought it up and how he saved the Super Bowl halftime show. But he really did. So the halftime show wasn't that great. Now, I was born in 93, so I don't know what it was like. But I can remember talking to my oldest brother, my dad, and my mom, and they said, like, yeah, the halftime show, it wasn't that great. And older sports fans that I know and colleagues that I work around or I'm friends with have told me, like, yeah, before Michael Jackson, the Super Bowl halftime show wasn't something that was of high regard. It was that halftime break like you get in any other sport or any other game for football. And the reason it garnered so much attention after 1992 was because of what Fox did. Now, in the article, it's discussed about how the station Fox, before they were affiliated with the NFL, decided to do a halftime spoof of the popular show called In Living Color. Now, what it was during the 1992 game, when Gloria Estefan was performing, Fox's show In Living Color did a Super Bowl spoof, and it even had a game clock on it so that viewers could see when the second half of the Super Bowl was going to start, and they could switch back to it. But the reason it got it garnered so much attention is because the halftime show in 1992 with Gloria Estefan, it wasn't that big. Like, nobody really cared. But within In Living Color, the show, It was produced by Rosie Perez, and it had Keenan and Ivory Wayans along with Jim Carrey in it. And the show was hilarious. A lot of people loved it, and the spoof was great. And the reason it stuck out so much to CBS was because that show was such a huge hit that the ratings for the Super Bowl crashed by 10 points. Now, if you don't understand the regulations of FCC or what 10 points means, basically what it was that so many people were caught on In Living Color's show and how it went that even after the game clock ran down and the second half was starting, there was a good chunk of people, a little over in the millions, that just decided they were going to continue watching In Living Color. Now, to do that to where you take away so much attention from the Super Bowl, that is ballsy. And that takes a lot of grit. That takes a lot of work. And In Living Color, their Super Bowl spoof worked. It was something that went in their favor. And for them to be able to pull that off was pretty well awesome. Now, the reason this relates to Michael Jackson was because we fast forward a year. The 1993 Super Bowl. The NFL learned a lesson. They understood that, like, we can't just treat halftime like it's something of norm or like it's just a halftime. We need to make this a spectacle. Because if you go back and if you look at the Super Bowl before 1992, SportsIllustrated.com has a list about it, and I will post this link along with the link for the Forbes article and a few other links. The Super Bowl itself, before Michael Jackson, doesn't really have anything of merit. You know, there's like one of the Super Bowls, Super Bowl 21, has the Southern California area high school drill teams and dancers performing. Super Bowl 19 has the U.S. Air Force Band in it. Super Bowl 18 has the University of Florida and the Florida State University bands. There's nothing really significant that sticks out about the Super Bowl before 1993 because a lot of it was just these high school marching bands, a couple of big names here and there at the time, like Super Bowl 13 has Ken Hamilton and various Caribbean bands. Like, I'm not making that up. You can quote me on that. And it wasn't of anything great. The very first Super Bowl had the University of Arizona and the Grambling State marching bands. Now, I have family that went to Arizona, so that's pretty cool. You know, U of A Wildcats bear down. That's awesome. But after that, there's nothing that sticks out. A lot of it is predominantly mostly college marching bands. And that's why they chose Michael Jackson for the 1993 Super Bowl, was because he was the biggest name in music at the time. And his performance is one of the top 5 greatest Super Bowl halftime shows. It was spectacular. You couldn't have asked for anything better, and it ultimately worked in favor for the NFL because when Michael Jackson did the halftime show for the 93 Super Bowl, it was the biggest act on the planet for the biggest game. That just went absolutely right. You couldn't have asked for a better setup. The Super Bowl's ratings increased by 8.6% from the previous year in 92. Along with that, NBC was able to keep its audience during the halftime as well as the second half. So, like, they didn't have that drop-off like they did in 92 with In Living Color's Super Bowl spoof. Now, that paved the way for what a lot of fans enjoy now. You see those big names, and they look for those big acts during that time of the year that they know are going to draw fans. Because here's the thing. You can go online. You can go watch the Super Bowl halftime show. You can have a ticket for that and not even have to go to the game or even stay around for the game unless you have a ticket to that as well. But you can get a ticket to the halftime show, be on the field, and never even have to stay to watch the game. Now, as a music fan, that's great because if it's a band you really love and you really want to see them and you have a chance to, maybe get seen on TV or be part of something cool if they give you like some lights or like a sign to hold up, or even if you make a sign that is somehow makes it on TV. Like, that's where the excitement comes in for the music fan. And that's where you see that influence and how the Super Bowl itself can generate that revenue and that money because of the simple fact that, like, they can draw an entirely different audience from sports fans. Now, if you're a sports fan who also likes music, well, it's a win-win because even if your team's at the Super Bowl or not and you have a ticket, you're at the freaking Super Bowl. Like, the first time I got to see the Giants in my time of life win a Super Bowl was Super Bowl 42. They were playing in Arizona, and I was living in northern Arizona at the time. I wish I could have gone to that game, but I didn't get a chance to. Now, the reason it's so cool is because like it was just down the road, and you're thinking like, man, that's awesome. It's like it's right there. On top of that, Super Bowl 42 had one of the most iconic bands ever performing in Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. It's Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Like, that is a great band. Again, someone who loves old school music, old school rock, and kind of that blues and that bluegrass feel stuff. Seeing Tom Petty live, and like, granted, I was just a kid thinking like, oh, he's only 7 hours down the road. That was cool. I thought that was really cool. And for fans, that's where it kicks in, because it's a double win there for you. Because if you are a fan, like if you're an Eagles fan this year and you got to see your Eagles not only win a Super Bowl, but on top of that, like one of your favorite music artists from when you were like a teenager, or someone you like listening to now in Justin Timberlake, got to perform. Now, granted, the outfit he had on wasn't the greatest pick in a lot of people's eyes. I really didn't care, but that was just something a lot of people talked about, so I figured I'd bring it up. But still, his performance was really good. He gave a tribute to Prince, and the way Minnesota had it set up with the whole city lighting off in one sub-district showing Prince's logo in that purple, and Justin Timberlake performing one of his songs on the piano, like that was a pretty cool setup. Now, is it top 5? In some people's eyes, it probably is, but it's still going to be remembered in more recent years as one of the better halftime performances because of how well it was done, how well it was constructed, and the fact that the artist that they had at the time not only was a big name in music, but he was a big name in pop culture. The guy's one of the funniest and best actors when it comes to children's movies, adult comedy, rom-comedy. Like he's all over the place. And he used to be part of one of the biggest boy bands ever in NSYNC. Now, a lot of early 2000s teenage girls are probably getting excited and stuff when they saw him perform if they were there live, and people probably watching at home were doing the same. But that just goes to show you how well of an influence music had in sports, and how music in itself was able to save one of the biggest sporting events of the year in the Super Bowl. Like I said, in '93, the ratings increased 8.6% for CBS/NBC, and they were able to keep that second half audience. They're not able to do that if they don't have music, and they probably still can't do that now if they don't have great performers. And that's why when you look at the Super Bowl, they're always looking for those big names, like the big hits, those artists that have come out and said like, yeah, this is the band we want to hear, or this is the artist we want because we know it's going to keep the attention of the fans. So that's just to give you an idea and help you better understand how music and sports, yet again, although two completely different entities, without music, sports and the Super Bowl in particular may have struggled. And if you look at pop culture in general with like advertising and marketing and the commercials themselves, they still have that factor of music in them to where if they don't have that, the marketing probably doesn't do as well, and the commercials, who knows, probably aren't as good. For example, this year's Super Bowl, one of the commercials was the Doritos halftime commercial that had Morgan Freeman and Peter Dinklage doing the Mountain Dew and the Doritos combo. And they voiced it over with some music, and they just did a lip sync battle. But without that, I don't think that commercial's as funny. Could Doritos have found probably another way to do the commercial? For sure. But that sticks out to your mind because it's just so funny. And the way they were able to use not only the music, but they're able to combine two products with Doritos Blaze and Mountain Dew Ice. But again, that music helps make those commercials, and there are some that they're able to do that. And again, the Super Bowl performance is able to help create that connectivity between music fans and sports fans. So who knows, there may have even been someone who was just like, I just want to watch the halftime show, and they started watching the game with like 2 minutes to go until halftime, and the game was really good, and it caught their attention. And after the Super Bowl halftime show was done, they decided, I'm going to watch the rest of this game. And at that moment, you just never know. Someone could have become a lifelong NFL, a lifelong sports fan. If they became a Patriots fan, shame on them. If they became an Eagles fan, I'll live with it. There are worse people. But that just gives you that idea. Now I'm going to look at in my opinion, my top 5, or at least my favorite Super Bowl halftime performances. So my first choice and this is going from 5 to 1. My first choice at number 5 is going to be Super Bowl 40 in the Rolling Stones. Now, the reason I choose the Rolling Stones is because they're an older punk band or an older rock band, and some people have labeled them punk pop, whatever. But the Rolling Stones are just such a good artist. You listen to a lot of their original stuff, the high-pitched voice, the flow. They're one of those bands that you probably could put them in that category with Stadium Rock as well. But I love listening to their music and just sticking out. Super Bowl 40, that was a great halftime performance. I can't remember who was even playing during that game, but I thought the halftime show was great just because when I was listening to the old school music, I didn't grow up in that area. I was only born in 93. I'm a millennial who are not the most liked generation for some weird, awful reason, but I grew up listening to older music because of my dad and my mom, and a lot of that classic rock and that old school rock it's always stuck out to me. And the Rolling Stones and that halftime performance, you couldn't have asked for a better show. I'll play a live segment here just so you can hear it and enjoy parts of it. But overall, like them live, you can't beat that. So I'll play some of the sample from Super Bowl 40 and why it stuck out to me so much. Okay, so my second choice is Super Bowl 31 because it has 3 really iconic artists from 3 really different areas of music. It was James Brown, ZZ Top, and the Blues Brothers. Again, I'm an old school kind of person, and you're going to realize here shortly that most of what I'm going to pick is not really a lot of the new stuff, but it's James Brown. I mean, the guy was just such a great artist. He danced like none other, but his music just had a really high up-tempo beat, and that's something I've always enjoyed about his music. Is it's no matter where you're at, even if you don't really know who he is, when you hear one of his songs play, you have a very distinct idea of knowing that sound sticks out differently. Now, ZZ Top, they fall in that area of that old school rock of where they're one of the better rock bands that came out from the 70s into the 80s. Their song "Sharp Dressed Man" is one of my favorite songs of all time. And the Blues Brothers, the Blues Brothers they were an iconic sound that at the time of when they played, nobody else was doing what they did, and the music itself is so good. I remember when my oldest brother first introduced me to the Blues Brothers, I fell in love immediately because it had such a soulful setup to it. It had such a great vibe and a great flow. And the movie about the Blues Brothers is also one of my favorites because there's a part where they're looking at each other, and I believe they look at somebody else and they say, "We're on a mission from God." And I will play that segment as well, along with part of the Super Bowl 31 performance that James Brown, ZZ Top, and the Blues Brothers all did. But that one was a great one. I loved it so much. I was just a kid, and I remember rewatching that halftime show a couple of times just because those 3 artists just stick out as, in each in their own right, could arguably go down as some of the best musical artists, regardless of genre, ever. And at the time, this was when you saw that the halftime show was still building big-time names, and to be able to bring in classics like those 3 and still put up a really good halftime show like that was awesome, and that's why I think that one's number 4 for me. But before I go any further, I'm going to go ahead and play some of the segment or some of that live Super Bowl for your enjoyment.
For me and the Lord, we got an understanding. We're on a mission from God.
I'm a soul man. I'm a soul man. I'm a soul man. I'm a soul man.
Perry, little old band from Texas, ZZ Top.
I'm in love, I've been down. Take my word, my way round. Ain't asking for much. I said, Lord, take me downtown. I'm just looking for some touch.
Now, before I name number 3, I know that when I speak of the Blues Brothers and ZZ Top and James Brown, that Super Bowl, there are a lot of people that think that Super Bowl wasn't that great because Jim Belushi and Dan Aykroyd were on there, and they felt like though when they were up, there wasn't as much time for like James Brown or ZZ Top, but that doesn't take away from it. For me, I still think it's a great Super Bowl. Other critics may disagree, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, before I start to ramble, I'm going to go ahead and say what my third choice is. Now, this one is more recent when it was Katy Perry, Lenny Kravitz, and Missy Elliott, because simply that Super Bowl performance, and for those of you that don't know, that was Super Bowl 49. Now, the reason I chose Super Bowl 49, I know it's more recent years, and Lenny Kravitz, Missy Elliott, and Katy Perry aren't necessarily old school. They're what I call generational time shifts of music. They're those ones that came in I can remember from my preteen years to even now, to where all three of these artists have been an influence. Now, Missy Elliott, that's more old school rap, old school hip hop. I know her really well, her music really well, simply because of the fact that my oldest brother and my older siblings introduced that stuff to me. You know, again, going back to my first episode in Hoops and Hip Hop, it was just music I enjoyed. But that Super Bowl performance was so good. And Lenny Kravitz, his music, he gives off that Jimi Hendrix feel, the way he can play, the flow of his guitar riffs, and just how he puts it all together. He was, in my opinion, it felt like Jimi Hendrix reincarnated. Now, Katy Perry, she's a great artist. Love her voice. Very, very good-looking woman. But the other reason this one sticks out as top 3 to me is because of the Left Shark. Now, SportsCenter also did a commercial for this called their segments of, this is SportsCenter. It was really funny, but that whole performance from start to finish, the visual effects, for a 15-minute show, I was encapsulated the entire time. It was a lot of fun, loved listening to it, and it really just stuck out. Before I reveal my top 2, I'm going to play some of that segment from the Super Bowl just so you can enjoy it and just kind of like relive it. If you get a chance, I am going to link my top 5 Super Bowl performance that I listed in the bio. Be sure to check them out if you want. Watch them. You don't have to, but those in my opinion are my top 5. If you want, shoot at me what your top 5 is on Twitter at SportsHop. It's at sports_hop1. It's also written in the bio as well. But yeah, let me know what you think your top 5 is. But let me play that for you here really quick.
I kissed a girl in my lifetime. Taste of her cherry chopstick. I kissed a girl just to try it. I hope my boyfriend don't mind it. It felt so wrong, it felt so right. Don't mean I'm in love. I kissed a girl I liked it. I liked it. I got a cute face, chubby waist, thick legs in shape, front shaking both ways, make it do a double take. Planet rocker, show stopper, flow popper, head knocker, beat scholar, tail dropper, do my thing. Now everybody here getting out of control. Get your back so cause misdemeanor said so. Throw your hands in the air, now throw your hands in the air, now throw your hands in the air.
Okay, so my number 2 choice comes from the 2007 Super Bowl in Super Bowl 41. The late Prince, great artist. You can't say enough about what this man's influence was in music. Not only that, but he was actually a great sports fan, a big-time sports fan. For those of you that also like pop culture and comedy, well, for the most part. He also was known to be an avid basketball player, and he has Chappelle Show from David Chappelle, the comedian. He did a skit on his show where Prince played basketball against Charlie Murphy and his friends, and a lot of people made fun of that segment because, it was hilarious, but the funny thing is it's actually a true story. If you get a chance, that's something completely different. Look it up on your own time. It's pretty cool, but the reason that Super Bowl stuck out so much for his performance is it was a royal performance. The 80s icon played some of his best music, Let's Go Crazy, and then he covered Along the Watchtower, Proud Mary, and he also did a song from the Foo Fighters in The Best of You, and it was so good. It sounded great. The man never, ever lost a feel or his touch for music. He was just great all around, and what capped it all off was that he brought the house down with the song Purple Rain as his finale. And what makes that one so great is that there was a downpour when it was happening. So when you have that imagery with the song, it was perfect, and it spoke out to what Prince was, playing Purple Rain in the rain. The visuals, his guitar, the light blue suit with the orange shirt, it all worked, and it was hands down one of the best performances. Me rating it number 2, I was a little heartbroken, but my top choice, which I'll reveal here shortly, for me, it sticks out because it was just a personal one, and I loved it so much. But before I reveal that, I'm going to play some of that Super Bowl performance from Prince's Super Bowl 41 halftime show.
Never meant to cause you any sorrow. I never meant to cause you any pain. I only wanted one time to see you laughing, babe. Only wanna see you laughing, yeah. In the purple rain, purple rain, purple rain.
Okay, so my top choice for my favorite Super Bowl halftime show was Super Bowl 48, which was Bruno Mars and Red Hot Chili Peppers. That show was great. Two really great iconic artists in two different complete genres, but the way their music sounds and how it fits together when they go hand in hand is really cool. The Red Hot Chili Peppers, the reason I like them so much is their music is it's so uplifting, it's so upbeat, and granted they do have some songs, that are slower, more methodical, and kind of have that more emotional feel to it, but that halftime performance was just a lot of fun because of the fact that the way they performed, like you saw vintage Red Hot Chili Peppers with Bruno Mars, like two very upbeating people, or groups, and what was funny about it was that even though that game was 22-0 at halftime, a record 115.3 million viewers still turned in for Bruno Mars's performance. And he had 3 songs that he did for his show. He did Treasure, Locked Out of Heaven, and Just the Way You Are. And then obviously the Chili Peppers joined him for their all-time classic hit, Give It Away, from 1991. But the performance itself was just great. The way they performed, all of it was awesome, and I loved it. I'll play some of that here now just for you to enjoy.
Just give it away.
Okay, now before I wrap up the show, I want to throw in one as my honorable mention just because the show had a really cool visual to it from a historical standpoint, but that was Super Bowl 47, the year before Bruno Mars and Red Hot Chili Peppers, when it was Beyonce and Destiny's Child. Now, my sister loved Destiny's Child growing up, and she would make me listen to it, and back then I didn't like it, but now it's like Beyonce is a really great artist. Destiny's Child is just so old school, early 2000s style setup. But what made that one really cool was because they came out in those historic Black Panther uniforms. Now, it is February, Black History Month, and that whole performance was great because it had such a cultural insight to it. It had a lot of just great performance, and it spoke out to an entire movement of people who spoke toward equality. But again, it was Beyonce and Destiny's Child. It was one of the coolest halftime shows, and yeah, I have to mark it as honorable mention overall, but I'll play some of that for you as well just to enjoy, but it sticks out as my honorable mention pick. But let me play that for you, and then I'll get the show wrapped up for you, goons.
Let's get so crazy right now. Most incredibly, it's your girl, yes, B. History in the making. So crazy right now.
I look at that so deep in your eyes. I touch on you more and more every time. When you leave, I'm begging you not to go. Call your name 2-3 times in a row. Such a funny thing for me to try to explain. How I'm feeling and my pride is the one to blame. I still don't understand just how you like to do it, no one else can. How y'all feel? Say it, yellow. Say it, your time. Come on. One more again. Say it.
All right, so there you have it, episode 3 of Sports Hop, and looking at the history of the Super Bowl and how Michael Jackson, and kind of in a nutshell, explaining to how he was able to save it and what it's ultimately become to this day now. Again, the Super Bowl, for a lot of people, it's a big-time game. It's one of the biggest games, if not the biggest game of the year across all sports. It just sticks out. But on top of that, again, the halftime show it's something completely all alone. It's different from the Super Bowl. It helps make the Super Bowl, and I don't think without it the Super Bowl is as big as a hit for people, even if they're sports fans or just music fans. That halftime show brings in a ton of viewers, and the fact that they're able to bring in big time names for it, it really sticks out. And I know there are probably some Super Bowl halftime shows I didn't get to bring up, with the whole, one of them being like Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake's, malfunction of the wardrobes, as it was famously called, Nipplegate. But that gives you an idea of, again, how influential sports is with music. The Super Bowl is just, it's so great. It's one of the coolest things ever. And when you look at it, you can't really have one without the other. And it's only a 15-minute performance. Let's not forget that the Super Bowl, these performers get 15 minutes. That's 3 songs at best for a lot of these artists, and they still come out and can put on great shows. Now, granted, not all of them have been great, but we're not going to worry about that. This, again, was just to look at the Super Bowl itself and how its history with music. Without it, the Super Bowl probably wouldn't be where it's at today. Music itself still sticks out, but they were a big part in making sure a big franchise in the NFL was able to succeed and keep going, especially for their biggest game of the year. Well, that's going to do it here for me, goons. Again, this is Sports Hop, a show that looks at 2 independent entities in music and sports and just examines how they've influenced each other over the years. 3 episodes in. I hope you guys and girls are enjoying it. Again, if you get a chance, show me some love on Twitter. The handle is @sports_hop1. If you want to show me some personal love, my handle is will_MCL11. And again, once more, as always, a shout out to my friend Chris Smith, guy who really got this show going and gave me the chance to run with it. Till next time, peace out, goons. Have a great time.